He was alone on an Arctic sea cliff when he heard a sound he could not explain. Not wind. Not the ocean. Something in pain. Something that should not have been there at all. What Daniel Hayes found on that ledge and what emerged from a snowbank 5 months later is a story that does not have a clean ending. Only a cliff, a rope, a polar bear who had run out of options, and a man who could not walk away. Drop your city or country in the comments. We love knowing where in the world our stories reach. Now, enjoy watching. It is March, and the light is coming back. After 4 months of near total darkness, the sun has returned to Svalbard low and pale, barely clearing the horizon before it dips again. But there, Daniel is standing outside his research tent on the tundra plateau, both hands around a mug of coffee that has already gone cold. He is not looking at the sky. He is looking at the snowbank 40 meters to the north, the one that has not moved or changed or given any sign of life since October. Then it moves. Not wind. Not settling snow. The surface buckles from beneath, and something pushes through a dark shape that widens as it emerges, shaking itself free of 5 months of packed snow with a single, enormous shudder. She is thin, thinner than he expected. But she is alive, and behind her, pressing close to her flank in the blinding white, are 2 shapes the size of large house cats, pale gold, uncertain on their feet, blinking in light they have never seen before. He does not move. He does not breathe. He just stands there in the March cold, holding a cup of coffee he has forgotten about, watching a polar bear and her twin cubs take their first steps onto the surface of the world. And he thinks about October. 5 months earlier, the light was already failing. Late October in Svalbard means 16 hours of darkness and the first serious storms rolling in off the Barents Sea. The sea ice had not yet formed, running 3 weeks behind the historical average, and the bears were restless, moving earlier than usual, searching the coastline for den sites. Daniel had been on the island for 6 weeks, tracking bear movements as part of a long-term climate monitoring project. He was working a transect along the top of the Isfjorden sea cliffs when he heard it. A sound that cut through the wind like something urgent and alive. Not a crack of ice or the boom of a wave. Lower than that. Rhythmic. The kind of sound an animal makes when it has been making it for a long time and is running out of strength to keep going. He stopped walking, moved toward the cliff edge and looked over, 150 feet below. On a narrow basalt ledge above the Arctic Ocean, a polar bear was trapped. Her rear left leg had gone into a crack in the rock, a fissure opened by the constant freeze-thaw of an Arctic autumn, widened just enough by a recent rockfall to swallow a limb and close around it again. She was large, 400 pounds at least. She had been pulling at the crack for a long time. The ledge around her was scored with claw marks, the rock face wet where she had pressed against it again and again. The sea below her churned gray and white in the wind. Daniel pulled back from the edge. He checked what he had. A 35-meter safety rope, standard issue for Svalbard fieldwork. A basic harness. 2 anchor bolts. A geological hammer. A frozen fish cake in his pack from lunch. He was not a climber. He had rappelled exactly twice in his life, both times in training courses he half remembered. Before we go any further, wherever you are watching from right now, drop your city or country in the comments. It means a great deal to us to know how far these stories travel. The wind off the Barents Sea does not negotiate. It hits the cliff face in long, rolling gusts that swing a person sideways and then release them without warning. The sound it makes against the basalt is a low, constant roar, that you stop hearing only because there is nothing else. Daniel drove both anchor bolts into a horizontal crack at the cliff top, tested each one until his arms ached, threaded his rope, and stood at the edge looking down at the ledge below. The bear had not stopped. Even after hours of effort, even with a leg wedged into stone, she was still pulling short. Deliberate attempts, resting briefly between them. He could see her flanks heaving with each effort. He could see something else now. At this angle, her abdomen was heavy and low. She was pregnant. Deep into it, weeks away, maybe less. She had not come to this cliff to hunt or to cross. She had been searching for a den site, the kind of sheltered, snow-covered hollow in the rock face where polar bears have their cubs in the dark of December and January. She had been trying to secure a future for lives that did not yet exist, and the cliff had taken her instead. He leaned back into the rope and started down. The basalt was cold and slick with spray from the ocean below. He kept his eyes on the ledge. At 100 feet, the bear heard him. She swung her head up and around the movement fast, despite everything. The instinct still sharp, even when the body had nothing left to give. She exhaled once, hard, the sound carrying clearly against the wind. She watched him. He stopped descending. He hung on the rope and let her look at him, let her read whatever she could read from his stillness, his position, his silence. He stayed there long enough for the rope to begin to cut into his harness. He stayed until her head dropped slightly, not in surrender, but in exhausted recalculation. Then he moved again. At 20 feet above the ledge, he reached into his pack and pulled out the fish cake, frozen solid. Barely recognizable as food, he held it out for a moment, then tossed it toward the ledge. It landed 2 feet from her front paw. She looked at it, looked at him, looked at it again. Then she ate it. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to make a decision with no good options, where every path forward had real risk, and there was no one to ask? Daniel was hanging on a rope above the Arctic Ocean, negotiating with a 400-pound pregnant polar bear, and he was doing it alone. He kept going down. He reached the ledge. 3 feet of crumbling basalt, angled slightly outward. The ocean 150 feet below. He examined the leg. The crack had it from mid-shin to just above the paw. The rock had closed around it as her weight settled, the geometry locking her more securely the harder she pulled. The leg appeared intact, but she could not extract it at the angle it went in. The only way out was to widen the crack. He took out the geological hammer. She did not pull away. She watched him with the same direct attention she had given him since he came over the cliff edge, not threat scanning, not preparing to strike. Quieter than that. The kind of attention that sits between exhaustion and the decision to trust a thing you cannot understand. He chose a point 4 inches from her leg on the uphill side of the fissure and struck. The impact rang through the basalt and through the ledge beneath his feet. The bear flinched, pulled her head down. A low sound, but held still. He struck again. And again. The rock gave way slowly, in chips rather than breaks, each fragment falling away into the spray below. His arm burned with the angle. The light was failing fast. The crack did not want to open. He worked for 25 minutes. Then, between one strike and the next, the stone released a deep, grinding shift in the basalt, the sound of something that had been under pressure for a long time finally giving way. A section of rock dropped from the face. In the gap that opened, the bear's leg moved. She felt it before he did. She shifted her weight, pulled once careful, testing, and the leg came free. She drew it onto the ledge and held it there, just breathing. He expected her to stand. Polar bears are built for endurance in conditions that would end most animals. He expected her to test the leg, find it usable, and begin looking for a way back up the cliff. He stepped back slightly, giving her room. She did not stand. She raised her head and looked at him with an expression that had no performance in it, nothing fierce, nothing threatening. Only the absolute plainness of an animal that has spent everything it had and arrived somewhere on the other side of that. Then she moved toward him. Not a lunge. The slow, deliberate movement of something working past its own limits. She closed the distance between them and pressed the weight of her head against his chest. He went completely still. The mass of her against him was extraordinary, not the aggressive weight of an animal attacking, but the settling weight of a creature that has decided to stop fighting. He could feel her breathing against him. The cold of her fur against his hands. Beneath that, very faintly, the deep vibration of a heartbeat that had been working at full capacity for hours. He did not move. He did not speak. He stayed. And then she turned, slowly, and positioned herself with her back to him, not threateningly, but with the careful deliberateness of an animal that has made a decision and is committing to it completely. Her weight came against him in stages, each increment a question that he answered by remaining where he was. She was not going to climb. She could not. The leg would not carry her up 150 feet of icy basalt. The temperature tonight would drop to -22. If he left her here and went for help, she would not survive the morning. Her cubs, the ones still weeks from being born, would not survive either. He understood what she was asking. He worked quickly, without rushing. He unclipped the spare webbing from his harness, passed it beneath her chest, looped it through his carabiner, and fastened it back to his own harness anchor. He did not know if the connection was perfectly positioned. He did not know if she would tolerate it once she felt the tension. He only knew that it was the thing that was possible, and so it was the thing he did. She tolerated it. He looked up at 150 feet of black basalt in the Arctic dark, with a pregnant polar bear fastened to his harness, and he climbed. There are no words that fit exactly. Not the burning in his forearms that started at 50 feet and did not stop. Not the way the wind came off the ocean in long sheets that pressed him sideways into the rock and then released him without warning. Not the sound she made quiet, constant, low against his back as he moved. The sound of an animal that has transferred its trust entirely to something else and is simply waiting for the outcome. He found holds in the dark by touch. He rested for 10 seconds at a time, counted, moved again. The sky above the cliff rim was the deep blue-black of an Arctic night with no cloud cover. The stars came out while he was climbing, millions of them, indifferent and brilliant, none of which he looked at. He looked at the rock. He reached the rim at the 2-hour mark. One last movement onto flat ground, the sudden absence of the wall against his hands. Then he was on his back in the snow. The bear was beside him. The wind moved over both of them without distinction. He stayed through the night. He had no choice. His hands were too cold to pack up and move, and she was not going anywhere. He covered both of them with his emergency thermal sheet. It was designed for one person and barely reached, and he lay in the Arctic dark on the tundra plateau, listening to a polar bear breathe. The temperature dropped to -22. The wind came and went. At some point, he slept. When the light came back dim and gray in the east, barely light at all, she was already on her feet. She tested the leg. It held. She stood fully, shook herself once, and looked at him for a long time with the same unhurried attention she had given him on the rope. Then she turned and walked north, toward the higher ground where the snow lay deep and undisturbed, toward the place where a bear goes to have her cubs in the dark. Have you ever watched something go a person, an animal, a moment you have been carrying and felt that specific kind of quiet that comes after? Not sadness exactly, more like the feeling of a chapter ending without you knowing yet what the next one says. Daniel stood in the gray Arctic morning and watched her go, and he did not know if she would make it. He did not know if she had made it. Not for 5 months. He stayed on Svalbard through the winter. The research contract ran through spring. He checked the snowbank every morning before anything else. Every evening before dark. November. December. January, total darkness for weeks. February, and the first pale light on the horizon. He walked the transect. He filed his reports. He checked the snowbank. Then it was March. He is standing outside his tent, both hands around a mug of coffee that has gone cold, looking at a snowbank that is moving. The surface buckles from beneath. She pushes through thin, slower than October, but alive. She shakes the snow from her coat and stands fully in the pale March light. She does not look toward him. She looks back at the den opening. 2 shapes emerge. Small, pale gold, uncertain on their feet, blinking in light they have never seen before. They press against her flanks immediately, seeking warmth, seeking orientation. She nudges each of them in turn with her nose slow, deliberate, checking. She was pregnant when she fell. She was pregnant when she asked him for help, and he carried her up 150 feet of icy cliff in the dark. And she made it to the snow. She found her hollow. She spent the winter inside it, and she brought 2 lives into the world. And she kept them alive through the coldest months in one of the coldest places on Earth. Daniel sets down his coffee. He is not sure what the right response to this is. He is a field researcher. He knows the scientific literature on polar bear maternal behavior, the denning period, the birth weight of cubs, the energy cost to a female who nurses through the Arctic winter without eating. He knows all of it. He also knows that knowing it does not fully account for what he is looking at. She did not look toward him. She did not bring the cubs to show him. She simply emerged from the snow and began the work of teaching 2 new lives how to be polar bears. He was 40 meters away, standing with cold coffee, and he was part of none of it. That is exactly as it should be. He watches until she moves north with the cubs, unhurried, toward the sea ice that is finally forming on the Barrens. The tundra closes behind them. He stands there alone for a while longer. Then he goes inside and writes the date in his field notebook. That is all. Polar bears are listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List, with a global population estimated at 22,000 to 31,000 individuals, a number that has declined as Arctic sea ice retreats earlier each spring and forms later each autumn. According to the IUCN Polar Bear Specialist Group, 15 of the 19 recognized polar bear subpopulations are declining or data deficient. Research published in Global Change Biology confirms that pregnant females are among the most vulnerable. Their denning success depends directly on deep, stable snowpack, which is becoming less predictable with each decade of warming. The denning period in Svalbard typically runs from late October through March, during which a female gives birth and nurses cubs without eating, a physiological feat documented extensively by the Norwegian Polar Institute. More at NPolar. No. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment. Tell us what it made you feel. Share it with someone who needs a quiet, true story today. Subscribe if you are not already here. There are more of these coming. Every one of them is true in the ways that matter.